You know that feeling? Right before you have to give someone some tough feedback.
Oh, yeah.
Or maybe when you know you're about to get some. That little knot in your stomach.
Yeah, I think pretty much everyone knows that one. It's universal.
Right. But what if I told you there's a way, maybe a surprisingly simple way, to make those conversations, well, frankly, most conversations, feel more positive and actually work better?
Exactly. And that's what we're digging into today. It's a core principle, really. Seems almost obvious on the surface, maybe,
Uh-huh.
but the impact is really quite profound. It comes straight from that classic how to win friends and influence people.
A foundational text for sure.
Absolutely. And the principle is simple. Begin with praise and honest appreciation.
Okay, begin with praise and honest appreciation. Sounds straightforward, doesn't it?
It does.
But I think what we really want to explore today is how this little shift, just how you start talking to someone, can genuinely change outcomes, at work, in your personal life.
Everywhere, really.
Yeah. So if you're listening because you want to get smart on this, like quickly and effectively, this is your deep dive into making conversations smoother, more productive.
Precisely. We're going to look at the upsides, the real benefits of leading with praise,
Okay.
but also what happens if you don't, the risks
Right,
involved,
the pitfalls.
and, what happens when criticism comes first. Plus, crucially, how you can actually use this day-to-day stuff, motivating a team, dealing with customers.
Practical application.
Exactly. We've even got a great story about how this literally turned a business around.
Oh, interesting.
And the source material uses this great analogy. It calls praise a kind of novocaine for the conversation.
Novocaine. Like at the dentist?
Yeah, it numbs things a bit, takes the
Yeah.
sting out of any, constructive feedback that might need to follow, makes it easier to hear.
I like that. Okay, so let's get into it. The source calls them golden apples, these benefits of starting with praise. What's the first big one?
Well, the first key benefit is how it lowers defensiveness, makes people much more open to actually listening.
Okay, why is that?
Yeah.
Psychologically, what's happening there?
Well, think about it. When you start by acknowledging something good, a strength, something they did well, you're not attacking.
Right. You're validating them first.
Exactly. So their immediate instinct isn't to put up walls, to defend themselves.
Mm,
It creates this little space, this openness, where they're actually more likely to hear what comes next, even if it's something difficult, like a suggestion for improvement.
that makes sense. And there's a specific example in the source, right, about President Coolidge.
Yes, the Coolidge story is a perfect illustration. He apparently had this habit with his secretary.
Okay.
He'd always start by praising her excellent work, her general competence, before gently pointing out, say, some punctuation errors in her typing.
Ah, okay. So the praise wasn't just fluff, it served a purpose.
Right. It acted like a cushion. It made the correction, the feedback, much easier for her to take on board without feeling criticized overall.
So, for listeners, maybe think about your own conversations. When you have to deliver something tricky,
Uh-huh.
how could starting with something genuinely positive about their contribution, their effort, how might that change their reaction?
That's a powerful thought, isn't it?
It really is. It's like saying, hey, I see the good work before you get into and here's an area we can work on. It just feels more balanced.
Completely.
Okay, benefit number 2, building goodwill and positive relationships. This seems pretty linked.
Very much so. When you offer genuine praise, you're making the other person feel valued, seen, important.
It's a basic human need, right? To
Ah,
feel appreciated.
absolutely. And when someone feels genuinely appreciated by you, it naturally fosters a more positive emotional connection. It builds trust. It strengthens the relationship itself.
The source brings up Charles Schwab here, big name in business. What was his take on this?
Schwab was a huge believer in this. He felt the best way to develop the best in a person was through appreciation and encouragement.
Not criticism.
Not primarily, no. He understood that when people feel valued for what they do contribute, they're just naturally more motivated. They want to perform better.
Yeah, that resonates. Think about a time you felt really genuinely appreciated, maybe by a boss or a teammate, even a friend.
Uh-huh.
How did that make you feel about working with them or helping them out?
It usually makes you want to do more, right? You feel more connected, more invested.
Exactly. That feeling of being seen is huge. Okay, and the third key benefit, setting a positive tone for the whole interaction.
This is crucial because how you start a conversation often dictates the entire mood, the whole trajectory.
That's the stage.
Precisely. If you begin on an upbeat note, acknowledging strengths, appreciating effort, You immediately create a more collaborative vibe, less confrontational.
That makes sense. People are less likely to dig their heels in.
Exactly. They're more likely to be open to your suggestions, your feedback, whatever it is you need to discuss.
It's like you're choosing the weather for the conversation right at the outset, aiming for sunny and cooperative rather than stormy and defensive.
That's a great way to put it.
Have you ever noticed that in your own life? How the first minute of a chat often predicts how the next 10 will go.
Oh, absolutely. A positive start just seems to smooth everything out, takes the potential edge off.
Okay, so those are the upsides. But what about the flip side? What happens if we skip the praise? If we just jump straight into the criticism?
Well, the source highlights three major risks here. The first one is pretty direct. It triggers resentment and defensiveness.
Seems almost inevitable, doesn't it? Hit someone with criticism first thing.
Yeah, their natural reaction is often to, well, put up a shield, defend themselves.
Even if the criticism is valid.
Even if it's valid, it can easily feel like a personal attack, even if that wasn't your intention at all. And when people feel attacked, what do? They stop focusing on understanding your point and start focusing on justifying their actions, protecting their ego.
So the actual message gets lost in the defensiveness.
Pretty much. It makes it incredibly hard for them to truly listen and consider what you're actually saying.
And the source mentions B.F. Skinner here, the psychologist. How does his work fit in?
Skinner's research on reinforcement is really relevant. He found that negative reinforcement, basically punishment or criticism,
Well,
it's generally not as effective for creating lasting positive change as positive reinforcement is.
okay.
And worse, it often comes with unwanted side effects, things like resentment, fear, avoidance.
Not great for teamwork.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
The source uses an example you might see, say, in leadership training at Google or Microsoft. Imagine a manager starts a project review by just listing all the flaws.
Right. No mention of effort or what went right.
Exactly. What's the likely outcome? A demoralized team. A team that's probably going to be resistant to suggestions next time.
Yeah, I can picture that. Have you ever been in a situation like that? Where someone started with criticism, maybe meaning well, but it just backfired. Made you dig in your heels.
I think most of us have experienced that at some point. It just triggers that defensive reaction. Okay, second risk of skipping praise. It can seriously damage relationships and erode trust over time.
This feels like a longer-term consequence.
It is. If your default mode is leading with criticism, people might just start avoiding you.
Ouch.
Or they become less willing to collaborate, to share ideas openly. Because who wants to constantly brace for criticism?
True. It undermines that psychological safety.
Exactly. And trust is just so fundamental, isn't it? Professionally, personally,
Yeah.
a constant stream of criticism chips away at that foundation.
There's a story about an employer in the source related to this, isn't there?
Yes, a really good one. It contrasts two approaches. This employer initially was very critical, constantly condemning mistakes.
And the result?
Predictably, a lot of animosity, disloyalty,
Mm-hmm.
just a negative environment.
Yep.
But then he made a conscious shift, started focusing more on kindness, on appreciating effort and contributions.
And what happened?
The change was apparently quite dramatic. Enemies became friends. The whole atmosphere shifted to something much more positive, more productive.
Wow. Just by changing the approach.
It really shows how powerful that shift towards appreciation can be for relationship building. I mean, think about your own key relationships. How important is trust, rapport?
Absolutely essential. You can't get much done without them. Okay, risk number 3. Starting with criticism makes it harder for your actual message to get through.
Yeah, this ties back to the defensiveness, but it's also about emotional barriers.
How so?
When someone feels criticized, judged, attacked, their emotional state can literally block communication.
Like static on the line.
Exactly. They might be so caught up in feeling hurt or angry that they just stop processing what you're saying. The content gets lost. Even potential solutions or helpful suggestions just don't land.
The Frederick S. Parsons story about the tax inspector illustrates this well.
Perfectly. Parsons found arguing with this stubborn inspector was getting him nowhere. Absolutely nowhere.
The more he argued.
The more the inspector dug in. Classic human nature.
So what did Parsons do?
He changed tactics completely. He shifted to appreciation, found something, anything genuine to commend about the inspector or his work. The inspector's whole demeanor apparently changed. He softened, became more cooperative, and eventually they reached a much better outcome.
Fascinating. Just by changing the opening move. Have you ever felt that yourself, so criticized that you just kind of tuned out, stopped listening to the actual word?
Oh, definitely. It's a defense mechanism, isn't it? You just shut down to protect yourself.
Yeah. Okay, so the source also goes into this tricky area. What happens when criticism does come first? Even if you try to, soften it. It talks specifically about the word but.
Ah, yes, the dreaded but. This is such a critical point.
Why is but so problematic in feedback?
Well, the example given is something like, we're really proud of your progress this quarter, but we need to see improvement here.
Okay, sounds fairly standard, maybe?
It does, but think about the effect of that word but. It essentially cancels out everything that came before it.
Hmm. Like it invalidates the praise.
Exactly. It makes the praise feel insincere, like it was just a necessary throat-clearing exercise before getting to the real point, the criticism.
Hmm.
The listener hears the but and thinks, ah, here it comes.
Right. Everything before the but just gets mentally deleted.
Yeah.
The focus snaps straight to the negative part.
Precisely. And the book offers a really simple, elegant fix for this.
Which is?
Replace but with and.
And how does that work?
So instead of, but we need to see improvement, you'd say something like, and we also see an opportunity to focus on improving this area next quarter.
Ah, okay. And.
See the difference. And allows both things to be true simultaneously. The praise stands, and there's an area for growth. It feels much more additive, less like a negation.
That feels much more collaborative, less like a judgment. We appreciate this, and let's work on this.
Exactly. It avoids that feeling of the praise being undermined. And of course, the source emphasizes that just starting with only criticism, with no attempt at praise first, well, that's even more likely to leave someone feeling deflated, unappreciated, and resistant.
Makes total sense. That little word carries a lot of weight. Okay, let's connect this back. How does begin with praise tie into the broader idea of positive reinforcement, especially for motivating people like teams or customers?
It's a very direct link. When you start by acknowledging something positive, an action, an achievement, an effort, you are, in essence, positively reinforcing that behavior.
Making it more likely to happen again.
Exactly. So for teams, the source suggests things like starting meetings by highlighting recent wins, even small ones, or recognizing specific valuable contributions.
So instead of diving straight into problems.
Right. Imagine, say, a team lead at Microsoft starting a project review. Instead of immediately pointing out delays or bugs, they start by saying, hey, Sarah, that innovative solution you came up with for the login issue, that was brilliant, really saved us some time. Or, team, hitting that beta milestone last week despite the challenge's great work.
That definitely creates a different energy for the rest of the meeting, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Sets a much more encouraging, motivated tone.
What about applying this to customers? How does that look?
With customers, it could be as simple as starting an interaction by genuinely thanking them for their business, their loyalty.
Especially if they're calling with a problem.
Maybe especially then. Or if they've given you positive feedback in the past, acknowledge that first before diving into any current issue they might have. We really appreciated your comments about X, and thanks for reaching out about Y today.
So you're reinforcing their positive engagement first.
Precisely. And the source also stresses praising even slight improvements. If a team is working on a tough goal, acknowledge the progress, however small. It encourages them to keep going.
That ties back to Skinner again, right?
Yeah.
Reward being more effective than punishment.
Exactly. Positive reinforcement fuels further effort.
There's that really touching story in the source about Stevie Morris, who became Stevie Wonder.
Yes, a beautiful example. It talks about a teacher who, instead of focusing on his blindness, appreciated his incredible sense of hearing, his musicality.
And that appreciation was a turning point.
Apparently so. It highlights how focusing on strengths, on what someone can do, and offering that encouragement can genuinely unlock potential. It can change a life.
Wow. And it also mentions the importance of specific praise, doesn't it? Not just generic stuff.
Crucial point. Generic praise like, good job is okay, but it lacks impact. Specific praise shows you've actually paid attention.
Like the Keith Roper example.
Exactly. The story goes, instead of just saying, thanks for setting up the printer, his manager apparently praised how quickly and efficiently he got it done, noting how smoothly it was running.
Much more meaningful.
Much more. It feels sincere because it's detailed. So thinking about yourself, what kind of appreciation motivates you the most? It's usually the specific, genuine stuff that really lands, isn't it?
Absolutely. Okay, this leads nicely into the narrative the source builds around an entrepreneur named Alex. This really ties everything together in a business context.
Yeah.
Tell us about Alex at the beginning. What were his struggles? What was his internal company environment like?
Yeah, Alex's story is a fantastic illustration. Initially, Alex ran his business with a pretty critical approach. Internally, this meant team meetings were mostly about what went wrong, missed targets, mistakes.
Oof. Morale must have been low.
You can imagine individual feedback, almost entirely focused on what needed fixing, areas for improvement.
So rarely acknowledging strengths.
Very rarely, it seems. His way of motivating people was basically pressure, highlighting negative consequences if they didn't hit the numbers.
Motivation by fear, essentially.
Pretty much. And his communication style was described as blunt, which unsurprisingly hurt morale. And in that kind of atmosphere, innovation. Forget it.
People were too afraid to fail.
Exactly. Afraid of the criticism that would inevitably follow any mistake or unsuccessful idea, it stifled creativity.
Sounds like a tough place to work.
Mm-hmm.
What about his external interactions? How did this critical mindset affect his dealings outside the company?
It mirrored the internal issues, really. His sales pitches, for instance, apparently focused heavily on finding flaws in competitors.
Rather than focusing on the client's needs.
Right. Customer service. Tended to be defensive when handling complaints.
It's an ideal.
Definitely not. Networking. Often came across as negative, maybe dwelling on his own problems. Building partnerships was tough because he was seen as demanding, overly critical. Even his marketing seemed to reflect it, maybe emphasizing what his product lacked compared to rivals rather than its strengths. It was like this critical lens tinted everything.
Yeah, sounds like a recipe for, well, not much success. So what changed for Alex? How did he shift gears?
The narrative implies he encountered these principles we've been talking about, maybe through reading, like How to Win Friends or a mentor, perhaps. He realized his approach wasn't working and made a very conscious decision to change, to embrace praise and appreciation.
Okay, so he decides to change. What did that look like inside the company? What were the tangible shifts in the internal environment?
The changes were pretty fundamental. Team meetings started differently. He began by acknowledging achievements, thanking people for their efforts, recognizing hard work, even on small things.
Setting that positive tone we talked about.
Exactly. Individual feedback sessions. They now started with sincere, specific praise about what the person was doing well before discussing any areas for development. Using and, not but, presumably,
Nice. And motivation.
shifted completely. Moved away from pressure and towards recognizing and rewarding progress, celebrating wins.
Building people up instead of tearing them down.
Right. His communication became more empathetic. He started trying to understand perspectives rather than just dictating. And crucially, he fostered an environment where trying new things was encouraged, where failure wasn't punished but seen as a learning opportunity. Innovation started to bloom because people felt safer.
That sounds like a night and day difference.
Yeah.
What about externally? How did this new appreciation-first approach change his interactions with the outside world?
Just as dramatically, sales pitches began differently. He started by genuinely complimenting the potential client, perhaps on their business or recent success, and then focused on how his product could specifically help them.
Client-focused positive.
Yes. Customer service interactions started with thanking the customer for their feedback, acknowledging their inconvenience first before addressing the problem.
Building rapport even in difficult situations.
Exactly. Networking became about showing genuine interest in others, appreciating their work, building connections, partnerships, built on mutual respect, recognizing each other's strengths.
And marketing.
Shifted to highlighting the positive, the benefits, the value his product offered, sharing customer success stories, focusing on the wins.
So this wasn't just about being, nicer.
Yeah.
It sounds like it had a real business impact.
Absolutely. The story concludes with Alex's business undergoing a remarkable transformation.
How so?
Employee engagement soared. Productivity went up. Sales saw significant growth. He built much stronger, longer-lasting relationships with clients and partners.
Wow.
And the narrative clearly links this turnaround, at least in large part, to that fundamental shift. Leading with praise and honest appreciation, he went from struggling to genuinely successful. It's a powerful case study for this principle in action.
It really is. So for anyone listening, maybe you see parallels between Alex's initial struggles and challenges in your own work or business.
It's worth considering, isn't it? How might consciously applying this principle, starting with praise, lead to similar positive shifts for you?
A very compelling example. Okay, as we start to wrap up this deep dive, let's crystallize the main takeaway. What's the one core message listeners should carry with them?
It really boils down to that simple yet powerful phrase. Begin with praise and honest appreciation. Remember, it's not just about being polite. It's a strategic tool, really, for building better relationships, achieving better outcomes, professionally and personally.
And if someone wants to try this out, like today, what's one small practical step they can take?
Okay, try this. The very next time you need to give feedback, or even just start a conversation that feels potentially tricky, pause for a second.
Yeah.
Find one genuine thing you can appreciate or acknowledge about that person or their recent work. Start there. Just start there and see what happens. Observe how it changes the dynamic.
Simple, actionable, I like it. And finally, maybe a thought to leave our listeners chewing on.
Just reflect on this idea. Abilities, talents, potential. They genuinely wither under criticism, but they absolutely flourish under encouragement. Consider the ripple effect. What could consistently leading with appreciation do for your own life and for the lives of the people around you? Which relationships, which situations could be transformed by this simple shift?